Do you have a favorite?
Not meant to. But mostly the unloved ones. The unvisited ones. The cases that get dusty and ignored. All the broken and shunned creatures. Someone's got to care for them. Who shall it be if not us?
Yes.
Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the very best new and old ideas for living in this world. Coming to you from 43 degrees south on a small farm in deepest Tasmania. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. This week, we welcome back to the show returning guest Khi Armand. Globe-trotting shaman extraordinaire that he is, Khi joins us from where he's currently based in Sao Paulo for a discussion on how we might best be with this moment, what lessons this moment might be inviting us to learn, and even what medicines may be available now that otherwise wouldn't be. We also, fair warning, talk about 30 Rock for a bit because that's just how we roll. So listen up, fives, a 10 is speaking. Hi, a very welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me, Gordon.
Yeah. I mean, it's been, we chat a little bit on Twitter, but I realized it's been a couple of years now. It was 2018.
Mostly 30 Rock. Are you a part of the 30 Rock fan group on Facebook?
No, I don't use Facebook. Something like that would potentially have me revise that policy.
That group is my coven. Like, right. I see things every day and I'm like, my people who remember mom and dad, Tina Fey and her crew.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking 2018 is a couple of years ago. This year is something of a wash, but it goes quick, right? Like, I was just sort of thinking like, wow, that show is getting on to like vote in a few years, really. I mean, what was that like?
It's weird how long ago it was. Yeah.
It's somewhat emblematic. I was thinking about, we were joking, by the way, people listening to this, Kai and I were joking on Twitter that this episode may end up just be us talking about 30 Rock for an hour, and that might just be what it is. It's somewhat emblematic of how we think and talk about culture at the moment, because famously earlier this year, Tina Fey pulled a couple of episodes from the streaming platforms where Jenna in particular was in blackface. Mm-hmm. And I think about it, I think that was the right move, but it's super interesting as to how you situate that, because I think the world has gone wrong if it's just an indication that the show is that old and time has moved on, but the world has gone wrong if people attempt to cancel someone like Tina Fey. Do you know what I mean? They come for a bunch of times and you look at it and go, is this the bad guy? Is Tina Fey?
She did it because she knew that, when it comes to certain contexts, and I mean, it totally works within the context of the show.
Yeah.
The two episodes, it's the one where she is, she and what's his name are the two black swans. And then when she and Tracy Jordan are doing the, who's more disenfranchised, white women or black men. And it is so good. Both of those episodes are so good. And in the context of the show, it works so well. But like, then there's the issue of people who aren't thinking about context, like Americans not thinking about context, and just like, ooh, I have liberty to do that now. And it was from that. So it hurts on one end, but she's trying to cover her own ass.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's a recognition that, as you say, like this isn't the time for nuance, and that's a pity, because the whole point of Liz Lemon as a character is a sympathetic yet really satirical read on a kind of liberal white woman, a coastal liberal white woman. Like she thinks she's more moral than she really is, right?
The episode where she thinks that where she's like, I'm not racist, but I'm turning in my like nearby neighbor because I think he's building a bomb, but really he's just getting ready for the amazing race. It is just so good.
Yeah. Or when she when she's buying that additional apartment in the building, and it's yes, all that kind of stuff of, I think I'm a good person, but I'm nevertheless going to gentrify the fuck out of this. Like that's the whole point of the show.
I thought about making like a 30 Rock like podcast or videocast where we just watch it and we just pause it constantly and make commentaries the whole fucking show, all the seasons. That would bring me joy.
That is it's a good idea. I think about it's almost like the return of audio commentaries, right? Like from DVD days.
Yes.
But the trouble is, the thing that not upset me, but the thing that I struggled with good audio commentaries is people would do that. They would like go, oh, and then during the filming of this scene, blah, 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 this happened, blah, blah, and then the show is moving on. And you do need the pause. You need the option to pause it.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, I was thinking about that. Just 30 Rock as an indicator of time and as an indicator of what like continues and what's good and what's still right for satire or ironic exploration and what isn't and how those kind of things change. I know it's an unusual place to start, but the show is a show that keeps on giving because it talks about universals from the inside, like corporate life and media representation and thinking you're more moral than you are and sort of how you get along with people. Makes it sound, if people haven't watched the show, this makes it sound like it's a really worthy thing, like it's, I don't know, Breaking Bad or something where it's like, wow, or The Wire, like it's a really intense commentary on American society. Like it's not, it's just hilarious.
It's just hilarious.
Cool. Well, I'm glad we got the 30 Rock stuff out of the way. I guess why I wanted to have you back on the show, well, other than we have really good chats when that happens, is I need you to fix the world again, I guess. Is no pressure.
Again, I just bought this really sexy like Spider-Man like tank top the other day that like I would have never worn a few years ago. So I guess I'm ready. It's so funny that because I was thinking about the show tonight, and then Tayana Lee McQuiller, who Tayana Lee McQuiller, who is the creator of the Hoodoo Tarot, which came out, I believe, earlier this year. It's very sexy. It's very beautiful. Designed by Caitlin Foisey. She posts on Instagram amazing stuff, especially about like the history of Americas and ideas that we have about like genealogy and the Americas and just a lot of lost American stuff, especially as it pertains to the way we see like race and ethnicity. You follow her for a while and you're like, wow, I've been lied to. But one of the things that she posted today was a Rumi quote. Yesterday, I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today, I am wise, so I am changing myself.
Yeah.
And yeah, like there's great stuff for us to do out in the world, get involved in. And then especially when it comes to my own experience of like spiritual groups and activism, where that often goes wrong is in our penchant for, drumroll, collusion. And collusion has everything to do with us. It has everything to do with the places where we sit on the fence and do not realize that we are unconsciously sitting on the fucking fence.
Yeah, it's a fraught process. I like that Rumi quote. It's on a cosmic level, or even, let's not even be that grandiose, even on a merely Jungian level, to reorder the world is to ritualize the reordering of your own internal experience anyway. Like, so you get caught in an infinite loop about fix the world, fix self. There's a very easy spoiler, but it's more challenging to navigate, which is that it's the same thing. Like that's the, spoiler alert, right?
It's a hard pill to swallow that what we're looking at is the culmination of all of our collective unconsciousness. It's a hard pill to swallow. It's a hard pill to say that I energetically have some cards in this. I energetically have some of this is a reflection of me. Not saying that, it's not a victim blaming issue. It's not I did this, but even that, if we are the sum total of our ancestors, that's a part of our energetic makeup. That's a part of what is, the manifestation prism thing that's happening from us. This is the sum total of our collective consciousness and unconsciousness. We've got skin in the game here. Our internal process has skin in the game. We're seeing a collective reflection back of what's going on inside, and it's ugly.
Yeah. Is that This is a good place to start, I guess. Is that the main lesson? Because one of the questions of the few that I put together is, what are some of the lessons we're being invited to learn at this time, do you think? And I think that's something of an overarching one, but I'm not sure if there are any, what do you think to that?
I think one of the things that, I can only look at my own life. Like one of the things that comes up a lot for me and that I've taken a lot into my client sessions has been the issues of like contracts and vows. If you think about collusion and the idea that I am unconsciously in cahoots with stuff that if I was conscious of it, and I was conscious of myself, maybe I wouldn't be in cahoots with it. Maybe I wouldn't look over and see that my left hand is totally, groping someone. Like, what the fuck are you doing, left hand? Like, that's collusion. Like, that's my unconscious collusion acting up. We are unconsciously colluding with so much. And part of that spiritually shows up in, unconscious contracts that we might have past life-wise, unconscious contracts we might have ancestrally, unconscious contracts we might have cosmically, arcanically. There's so much of our energy system that is operating on old operating systems. So we're seeing those operating systems crumble, and it's sending us into a panic because you said, but I trusted the social security system. I trusted that shit. I trusted that my kid would be in school from 7 to 3. I trusted that shit. And none of this shit was real.
Yeah.
None of this shit was real. And we've been energetically in cahoots with stuff that hasn't been real. And thinking about that from multiple different angles is one of the things that's being asked of us. Like, we're being asked to get conscious now.
Yeah, I like the idea of it being. There's so many. This is funny. There's so many C words for it, like consequences, complicity. Like, there's all these C words that come with it, and that come with contract. Like something Dr. Farrell said in one of his books is that the principal preoccupation of the Old Testament is contract law, and
yes,
and
covenants.
Yeah, and it's this sort of negotiation with the extra dimensional. You give me these sacrifices, and I make sure your state remains stable, and all this kind of stuff. Like, in many respects, it's creepy. Like, it's quite creepy. It's a well, according to the Gnostics, it is a deal with the devil, right? But it doesn't necessarily have to be. But there's that same sort of web or nest of assumptions and agreements from which you either took succor or power with and refused to look at it, I think, is for a lot of people, and that's unevenly spread across people in the modern world, obviously. But it's all, as you say, if there's ancestral flow down and previous incarnations business flowing into it, then everyone's kind of caught in the web of some of the things that are not just real, but almost like on the other side, the contracts are being cancelled. So it's like, well,
sure.
you ended up in a shitty contract with a dodgy dealer who is just refusing to honor it anyway, and it's a
dodgy dealer who's telling you, "Proud Boys, stand back, stand back." I mean, is he not the ultimate dodgy dealer?
Well, literally, he's a game show host and a Manhattan real estate magnate. So that nothing says mob like that.
Seriously.
Yeah, it's but again, like, interestingly, I not in a defense sense, but I want to jump to the other side and go, the trouble is the other option that is being offered is one that people, you may know this now that you're also an American in diaspora, right? The deal that's being offered at the other side of the table is the classic American complicity, which is you all get to pretend you're good and non-racist in the Liz Lemon sense, while the empire continues to pound children into paste, because the war policy coming out of the Democrats is not anything good, right? So
absolutely not.
It's caught in that same web of like, oh, I want to be, this contract that is offered to me allows me the illusion of being a good person within the Americas, but the other side, but the bargain, the deal there is that we're still drone striking your many children or something. And I mean,
I feel like the perfect person that really shows that is RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is just, did incredible things in her time and in her position. and then also was totally against Indian sovereignty, totally, like literally in one of her, rulings actually pulled on the doctrine of discovery, and it's interesting, just, these two sides are really not really two sides at all.
No, they're flavors of empire, and certainly there are more repugnant pustules on that carapace, right?
Yes. Yes.
But like it's definitely the one carapace, and I think that's the bit. I think people, it's a lot, and it's almost like I've been talking about this in some previous episodes. What's happened in 2020 is people are being forced to do two things, which is navigate the arrival of a new world, as well as do the kind of like intellectual and spiritual work of realizing that the world they're in was wrong. And some of us have started on that second bit already. Like we've been doing that for years, unpacking how things like power and governance operate in the real world before 2020 arrived. So the people who haven't, who kind of were, dare I say, blithely, even if they aren't, horrible people internally, but blithely operating, assuming the world is as described, now they have to do two things at once, which is move into the new world and also sort of reformulate a map of how the world works. And I think that's been a cause of a considerable amount of dissonance this year. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree, and it's funny because I've had a few conversations with those of us who have been on the fringes for a while. Like everything is falling apart, but in some ways, this feels a little bit better than it felt before because we knew that everything was a lie, and now it's like everyone's like everything's a lie. We're like, we know past the peas. Like we're like there's a certain lesser dissonance. The struggle is a little bit less. It's on that end of the reality scheming. Like we've been scheming with reality. We knew this shit was bonkers.
Yeah. Do you think this is, I mean, I can tie it into like longer astrological currents, like the transition of the triplicity from earth to air. So going from European land empires to the data control that we're like the free range prison that the world is about to be turned into with these technologies. Do you think the appearance of this stuff in the play-out world, in culture, in the unconscious and so on, is like, speaking of pustules and boils, is it the toxins coming to the surface and bursting so that they, in fact, leave the organism? Do you think that's a useful way of sitting with what's going on?
I think it's a really good way of sitting with what's going on. If there's been any word that's been on my, mind for 2 years in my own process, it's the unconscious, and the unconscious, you should think of the unconscious as a wild ocean landscape, and we are, we're walking on top of it, and sure, it's supposed to sort of like lap at our feet and enter our dreams, and one by one, like a little thing pops up for us to deal with, a little thing pops up to us for us to resolve or heal. We are now drowning. We are just way, way deep in the waters, and it's saying, you can't hold me back anymore. I was watching The Witch, the Double V Witch movie, that sort of New England 1600s-y, which I love. Some people really hate that movie. I hate the ending because it just moves a little too quickly in a direction that I don't like, where I feel like everything else is moving far more smoothly along the way. But it's a great movie if you want to understand about the unconscious. And I watched it again the other day with my partner, because he is trying to make sense of some of his own relationship to me and magic and witchcraft. And, it's, the guy, the protagonist, the father, he's living in like, a kind of Dutch Puritan-like community, and he gets ousted because they're tired of his, prideful bullshit. And he goes out into the wilderness with his family and builds a house and chops wood, and the crops are failing, and then little by little, like, his kids are being taken away by a witch in the woods, and he just keeps maintaining this sort of staunch view. And the second time I looked at it, I was like, wow, this movie is really about the forces of the unconscious, the boundaries we make to keep the wild unconscious out. And I feel like the message of the movie is, if you find yourself steeped in the unconscious, the last thing you need is hubris. You need to put your pride down and surrender not just to the forces of the unconscious, but to the forces that can really help you navigate through. And the father doesn't do anything, and he realizes that in like one of the final scenes of the movie. He's finally praying to Yahweh, and he's like, I realize I have been a fool. I realize that I can't keep my family safe, and I've been a fool, and like I'm just so prideful. Deal with me as you will. And if you've never seen the movie, I won't tell you what happens afterwards, but the unconscious goes, okay, we'll get that ass. And they come and get his ass. And there's some liberation for other characters, but, if you are finding yourself, as we are finding ourselves, mired in the unconscious, we need to step out of our pride. We need to step out of thinking we know exactly what to do. We have no idea what the fuck
That's
to do.
exactly it. Yeah, I absolutely agree. The Forest, it's beautiful. It's one of my favorite films. I'm actually okay with the ending, I think, but I know exactly what you mean. The Forest represents the unconscious in the sense of all the attempts to grow crops and eke out an existence. There are all these kind of like conscious human behaviors, and they are so flimsy and useless in the face of like the vast and because it is a colonial and settler mindset, the unconscious is terrifying. It's this thing that must be dominated by the rational. And the movie is an abject lesson, and that's not how you engage with the forest. And I like that, and I think that's absolutely true. And I think it's a metaphor that works really well for today, where there are still people who are hoping that this tiny little flimsy light of seeming civilization, of that kind of materialist rationality, will tame the era we're living through, and it won't.
We want to get even more specific. What we're mired in is ancient European fear. Well, not even ancient, but like circa 1,000 years European fear of the unconscious. Then that movie, we're not just dealing with, we're not dealing with American Indian fear of the forest and the wild. We're dealing specifically with a European fear of the unconscious and the wild. And that's where a lot of my own personal studies have taken me, especially when it comes to the very interesting conversation of the other, capital O other, known especially in Europe as the good folk or the Fae. Europe's, imperialism and colonialism in the world wasn't its first go around with the capital O other. Europe had the other right there, the neighbors, the good neighbors, the Fae, this conversation of those people over there that sometimes we make pacts with, sometimes we run away from, we have a healthy respect for the other. And we are now dealing with a world that has been dropped into an unhealthy respect for the other, an other that can only be assimilated or dominated. And there's a lot to be understood, a lot to be drawn from by looking at what did Europe lose with its loss of its connection to the Fae.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the damage wrought by the particular archon that I think is making a play for all the figurines at the moment, which is that descriptive materialist rationalist, the absolute it's almost it is childish, squeamish fear of the unconscious that comes from this kind of like categorization and separation and naming of things on maps and all the rest of it is this kind of this is that same being, and it's useful to sit with its, as you say, its initial arrival into the world.
Yeah,
which is
for sure.
Absolutely. So, is that last time we spoke? I believe you were, but only temporarily, in California. And that was a couple of years ago, and you've lived a bunch of places since then. So,
I have.
Yeah. So, like, why? And catch us up on the places you've been and where you are now and that kind of stuff, because there's I fancy there is insight in this particular quest or one that we share, the intellectual exercise of understanding kind of like what went wrong with European minds or what infected them.
500 years ago is where I would more or less put it. But we can argue the toss on that. Archons take a while to show up. But yeah, so talk us through the sort of whys and hows of kind of some of your adventures the last couple of years.
Sure. So yeah, I a couple of years ago, I was having a little. Sorry, my English is weird because I'm currently in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and I speak all day in a Spanglish. So I lose words. I want to say the word brinca, which means joke. I was in California at that time in a brinca era, chilling out, visiting some friends. And the past 2 years was, I had been dropped very heavily and deeply into what feels like it was a bit of an initiatory experience, a traumatic initiatory experience in regards to me understanding this force that, the Cree and Anishinaabe people call Wetiko, which is, it's a word you have to be careful with because it's very specific. And one of the things that I've been looking at more is trying to, this isn't just a local phenomenon. That word is a local phenomenon, but if you start looking at other cultures and other traditional medicine traditions, this is a thing that is implied, this issue of the person who is fully overtaken by greed and their very force field causes energetic collusion with others. And I was experiencing things that were just mind-blowing, even from visiting other medicine people who were in relation to those persons who I had realized had gone so far deep in the direction of a Wetiko-like state. If I was in relation to this person, another medicine person, and they were, the ways in which really strange things would happen that were entirely in collusion against my ability to survive, frankly. And I found myself kind of, state hopping, staying with friends, continuing my research, coming to an understanding of, I don't know the traditional Cree or Anishinaabe prayers for battling an energy like this. However, finding various medicines in Vodou, in Southern Conjure, that were sort of waking up and saying, I am totally applicable in this issue that you're facing that has to do with protection against, archonic forces, or that has to do with retrieval of soul parts or pieces that have been really thoroughly devoured, or even finding myself in spaces and physical homes where it was like the entire space has been rigged energetically to ensure that only one person who lives here is able to eat energetically, like a lion who has rigged the jungle to ensure that nothing leaves its mouth. And it was interesting during this time because I realized, when you happen upon a deep mystery and you realize your whole life has been leading up to this point. I had studied in San Cristobal de las Casas, Mexico, back in grad school with the incredible performance artist, Jesusa Rodriguez. She is a lesbian goddess. And she led me and my grad school group in a performance in the square of San Cristobal de las Casas. And this performance was about Monsanto, the big, anti-agricultural giant that's, always taking small farmers and suing them for use of, crops that just sort of showed up because the wind blew some seeds or some pollen into their farm, and now their crops are growing a bit different, and then Monsanto comes and sues them out of their mind. So here we are. We maybe 20 of us had this performance in San Cristobal de las Casas. Some of us were dressed up with big masks of Olmecs coming and protecting the spirit of corn. And others of us were dressed like devils with a big mouth, with a huge sculptural puppet-like mouth. And I remember the word that she used that these people were performing were the boca insaciable de Monsanto, the insatiable mouth of Monsanto. And here I am, learning this deep mystery about this energy that the Korean and Anishinaabe peoples call Wetiko. I'm like, wow, I did a performance about an insatiable mouth years ago. This has all been, I've been, being taught about this issue for so long. And we see it in so many of our stories and books and so on. So I guess I got enough of that medicine as I was supposed to. And there were some weird experiences in New York. At some point I was walking down 6th Avenue around 5 p.m. Everyone's getting out of work. And there's a guy who is yelling very loudly in Hebrew. And I'm like, oh, that's one of New York's prophets. I love my city, blah, blah, blah. And as soon as I pass by him, he starts speaking in English. He starts speaking aloud in English. And the first thing he says, and I won't share what was said, but the first thing he says, I know he's talking to me. And I turn around and face him. And here we are in this throngs of people walking down 6th Avenue, and he's looking at me dead in my eye, and he's speaking very specific things in English. And I'm just nodding and saying, thank you, thank you. And I walk away, and it was one of 2 or 3 experiences that kind of brought that piece to a close. And about a year later, I brought some, I was also relating, I was also having some experiences that were bringing to my understanding that I had a deeper relationship to the Americas than I knew of. I had a smell of it. There were people in my life who were very obsessed with African cosmologies and Asian cosmologies and the truth. And I was always like, you know what? I think I'm a little bit more syncretic. I think I'm here to do the New World thing and to operate in these New World traditions. And then out of that came some really deep understanding of my paternal ancestral connection to the Americas and some medicine that I was both warned about because it had not been being carried for a while. I was warned about it because it had to do with race. At least the way that race, people like me were being seen in the Americas, and it had to do with power. And I was told, this is something for you, but it's going to get you in trouble. And as soon as I took this medicine on, I'll be completely frank with you, white women started calling the cops on me, left and right.
Yeah.
Left and fucking right. It was like I was what was sort of me just like brinking across the states turned into, I'm literally being chased out of the United States. I had about 3 different run-ins in about a 2-month span that were like, this is ridiculous. I have a much better understanding of what's at stake now. And then it also brought up, why am I here? Why am I here? I'm already an international vagabond. Why am I trying to stay in this country? I have, energetic peeps, far-flung places. Let's go where my heart has always wanted to go. Some people might know I've had a long-standing relationship or connection to the Guatemalan folk saint San Simon. So I took my ass to Guatemala. And I fell in love. I fell in love with the small city of Quetzaltenango and got an apartment there and was very happy. Decided that I was going to do a little bit more studies in Quimbanda. Came down to Sao Paulo to connect with Nicolás de Matos Frisvold in Minas Gerais. Partook in a great workshop in January. Found myself with pneumonia, found myself in the hospital for a month. That was a long time coming from some health stuff. Stepped out of the hospital right into COVID, and Guatemala's borders had closed. And it is where I've been ever since. My stuff is still in Guatemala. I will be heading back. But since then, I have been living here in Sao Paulo with my partner, practicing and studying Quimbanda. Some very interesting Solomonic connections have come up. Not connected to Quimbanda, but connected to Quimbanda because of the way that these things, brinca together. So it's been a very interesting, magical adventure with a bunch of fae, or as it's known in the Portuguese context, duende shit to boot. That's where I've been, Gordon.
So there's a couple of things. I want specific anecdotes in Guatemala in particular to start with. But so a close friend of mine who I effectively smuggled into Europe, he's a Venezuelan refugee, like he claimed refugee status, and in fact the other week, he got his residency in Spain and whatever, but he was an at-risk LGBT youth that I met with his army of twink lesbians when I was in Lima last year, and we became friends.
That sounds awesome.
Oh my God, it was so hilarious.
I want an army of twink lesbian friends.
They're amazing. Very useful too. But anyway, because he's part indigenous Venezuelan as well. And so when you're talking about part of this journey being, you're going to have to do some race stuff, and that's part of it, and some of it's bad. I am aware that racism hits different in the Americas outside of the US, but it's nevertheless still there. Like this friend of mine, Ali, would get a job, would be hired in like a gift store or something in Lima, because he fled via Colombia and Venezuela. Until they found out he was Venezuelan, they're like, no, only Peruvians, out you go. And all the kind of behaviors that if you try to, even however, racist the West is, and of course it is, if you try to do that in Australia, you go to jail, right? You don't get to, you don't like, oh, I'm sorry, you're a different nationality, you cannot have this job. Like, so there's a race and racism is constituted differently, and is nevertheless present there. And a lot of it has to do with kind of like old-timey racism, like actual darkness of the skin. And I mean, how is that
old timey. I'm sorry. I was thinking of that meme that's like, I was thinking of the meme that's like, I want to be an old timey doctor that just does a lot, just says, oh, you got ghost in your blood, do a bunch of cocaine about it. It was the last time I heard the word old timey. Yeah, it's weird. It's weird, especially being in Brazil. I remember from the first time I got here, the first day I got here, I was hanging with my one of the other people who were taking the Kimbanda workshop with Nicolaj. He's a black guy from New Jersey, and like we got out of the hotel the first morning, and we're just like, why does Sao Paulo look just like Brooklyn? And we're just like popping off in the street, being wily tri-staters. But we're also like recognizing like there's something very sleepy about Brazil. Brazil doesn't have the racial justice conversation that the United States has had, which is a consciousness conversation. It's race consciousness. Brazil doesn't have the same, verbiage, the same background. And as I've been with my partner, learning a lot about, queerness here, even the word queer, the idea queer, it might exist here in ways I haven't discovered yet, but the idea of queer as different from gay, or, like a word that is often used, he'll get on the phone and he'll be talking to his best friend and he'll be like, viado, like viado is like, homo, like, viado, como você está, like, how are you, how are you, faggot? We're talking about these ways of seeing self and these ways related to identity, and I've had to catch him up a lot on, there are things that happen to me here that he doesn't understand, not only because he's not black, but he doesn't understand because he's not a black American navigating a race conversation that's similar to the US, but slightly warped because of the unconsciousness of regarding race in Brazil. I see it playing out. I see it playing out not as sharp daggery as it plays out in the United States, but it plays out under the surface. So we'll have experiences that he won't understand, or we'll be, having some experiences, and I'll, afterwards I'll be trying to explain to him like what just played out, and he'll be telling me his understanding from a Brazilian context, and it'll be, slightly different, slightly more unconscious, but then he'll get it, and then he'll realize, oh wow, just because I'm coming from a place where we understand what's playing out much better. And I think even like this past month, there was a documentary here on Brazilian television. It was so strange because it was a documentary specifically about racism in the United States. And they're showing like on the screen, like they're showing, the KKK and then like, recent police killings, but like the newscaster is speaking in Portuguese. And it's like mind blowing, but it's also interesting that they realize that the foothold the United States has on this topic is serious enough and loud enough that it's worthwhile showing to their people here.
Interesting. I like that. I mean, I don't like it. I like that.
It's interesting. It is interesting. I like it just because I'm, I like dialogue.
Yeah, sure. I also kind of hope, because there's, especially at the moment, and it comes up a lot, like Best Will in the World, or Heart's in the Right Place, but Head in the Toilet attempts to have healing discussions in the US tend to get hijacked into like essentially protecting large corporations from being sued by having, a collection of HR exercises, and this is, in that classic capitalist way, is replacing or seeking to replace or short circuit authentic conversations. And I have this kind of hope that the good bits of that process, much of which is insane, once it gets outside the US, kind of blends with, I think, more analog or organic discursive practices, because at the moment it's quite artificial. It's really like large corporate middle class training seminar speak, right? And I don't think it. I have this guess that some of those tools, when made organic in a non-American context, become potent transformative processes. Is that, I don't know, can you get a sense of that? Because you have a background in the good and the bad of how justice discussions happen inside the US, and now you're living in a different context. Am I wishful thinking, or what do you reckon?
Two things come to mind. One is a meme that I saw that was corporations are all like, join us in stopping us from destroying the world.
Yeah.
And I also think about, I think it was Audre Lorde who said the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house.
Yep.
I don't know if there's another option besides animism. I don't know. I would like to believe. I'm finding, I continually find that the most effective work that I'm doing on myself and in my engagement with others comes to the recognition that comes to the giving of personality, the giving of personhood, not only to the parts of our world, but to parts of ourself. I was talking to my therapist today, because some people in my life were like, Kai, you need to go ground and get a therapist. Some things you got to fix, and shamanism isn't going to help you. The spirits have no interest in you being more human. Talk to a therapist. But I ended up, finding this, middle-aged white lady in Indiana who I talked to on BetterHelp, and she's amazing. But even she gets like shamanic bleed over from working with me. And, she'll be like, Kai, I don't know why, but I was driving down the street the other day and I just sort of saw you in the trees, like a version of you. And I was like, okay, I'm like taking notes. I'm like, all right, this is possibly a soul part, maybe related to my relationship to voodoo. Okay, she's repeating, she has no idea what she's seeing. And I doubt that she's ever picked up like intuitive hits like this. But what I'm aware of is that she's picking up on pieces of me that she at least is open to recognizing as things that are worthy of giving personhood. And once we're giving stuff personhood, everything changes. Our whole concept of I am a rational self and you are the non-rational, wild, need to be assimilated or obliterated other falls apart, and we step into relationship.
Yeah.
I don't know if anything else is going to. I don't know if
I don't think there
else...
is, because the actual problem isn't racism, and it isn't any of the other. It's we aren't in right relation with the rest of the world. That includes
we're not in right relation
background. So the actual bad thing the bad thing underneath racism. You know what I mean by that? The actual thing that manifests in our world as racism or homophobia or whatever is not being in right relation. So I agree with you.
And we're not in right relationship with ourselves.
Yeah.
If you're not in right relationship with others, is because you're not in right relationship with yourself. And we're all fucked in that sense, because there's nothing in our cultures or societies that has supported us being in right relationship with ourselves. It's a very chicken or the egg conversation.
Yeah, for sure. It's also, follow me on this, a good tee up to returning to some Guatemala stories, because that extension of personhood or recognition of personhood, rather, all that kind of stuff. I would like, had you been to Guatemala before you decided to just up sticks and move?
No, I didn't. I'm a one-way ticket kind of guy. So I didn't really think I didn't know if I was going to stay. I spent 2 weeks by Lake Atitlan in a less touristy part of, because there's all these little small towns around Lake Atitlan. I stayed 2 weeks in San Lucas Toliman, and that was great. I stayed in a little pink house right on the lake with evangelicals, these two evangelical dudes. That was a lot. just to hear music that I was trying to get away from. Because, you know, evangelical music it's so weird because, you know, even my partner here in Brazil comes from an evangelical background. We could do a whole episode on Brazilian evangelicism. It's so weird how no matter where you go in the world, evangelical music sounds exactly the same. This pious, limp dick surrender energy. There's nothing ecstatic about it. It's just this pious, like unable to lift oneself or one's will up because you're all in submission to, and whether it's in Spanish or Portuguese or English, it's the same. So I'm like, all right, I've escaped the American context, and I like wind up right next to a Titlan with these two evangelical dudes who are playing like the same music I grew up with nonstop out of their speakers because they're missionaries. And I spent those 2 weeks there, and I was already, you know, a little traumatized from my time in the U.S., but I knew that the next place I had to go was Quetzaltenango because of its proximity to one of Mashimon San Simon's sites where he's honored, even shows up in one of his prayers. The town is called Zunil. And I had been on some of the Facebook expat groups sort of asking around, like, where do I find housing in Zunil? And people were saying, hey, you know, expats don't stay in Zunil. We stay in Quetzaltenango. Zunil's about a 10-minute drive away. So I finally got to Quetzaltenango, and I stayed in the hostel for about 6 weeks. And, you know, my Quetzaltenango is a city. It's a small city. It has a cosmopolitan energy. It's fascinating because you can walk down the street and you see women in traditional Mayan clothing, and you see women and men in business suits and casual wear. It's very half and half in that kind of cultural connection. But it also has this very rustic energy throughout the city. There's tons of, you know, cafes with Wi-Fi. There's a number of bars and clubs. But then there's this rustic Mesoamerican energy there too. And I realized after the 6 weeks, it was like, I think I'm going to stay here. Why wouldn't I stay here? And it was like, wow, yeah. This is a good place to be. When you wake up every morning and you're surrounded by, you know, volcanoes and mountains, and in a place that has what you need as a Westerner, but also isn't trying to drive you into the void, like living in New York. It was refreshing, and it was like, okay, I'm going to stay.
Yeah, it sounds fucking magical. I remember I was watching your tweets, and I'm like, yeah, that sounds really good. But the question, I think, so if you hadn't been to Guatemala before, I had an unusual experience. Well, that's just life, isn't it? When the plane landed last year in Santiago on the way to, because you can't fly direct to Lima from Australia. So you have to go Santiago and then Lima and then off into the jungle. I landed and got off the plane in South America for the first time I'd ever been there, this life. And I don't know if you've been to Santiago Airport, but it's, you can certainly see that there is a Nazi je ne sais quoi to the brutalist architecture of the airport. And I'm now going to say something weird. I actually kind of like Santiago's airport, but principally because you kind of get off at the gates, and on the side facing the Andes, it's like all glass. So you're walking along all the concourses and so on, and you look over the general valley that the city's in, and you see the Andes behind. It's incredible. But I had a moment of, as you tend to do when you get off a plane, like touched out into the earth. And I found it electrifying and familiar and home. And that grew to the point of being intoxicating by the time I got to Lima. And I wrote a big long post about this. But frankly, if I had been to Peru prior to my return from London, it would have been on the list of places where I was looking for somewhere to do permaculture, right? That's how profound the connection was. And had 2020 gone differently, one, we would have probably hung out in Brazil, but I would have spent a third of this year in Brazil and Peru. So I was looking at a life where I was going to be not part-time South American in that appropriative sense, but it's a place that is important enough, and I knew it instantaneously from the second my feet hit the ground. Now, that's the tee up to like if you hadn't been to Guatemala before, because I'm the same, I hadn't been to London before I moved to it, right? It's like, no, fuck it.
For sure.
Right? That's just how it's done. I think that's how it's done. But so tell me about that for you with Guatemala, because you have, longstanding relationships with some of its more famous spirit exports. Did you get something similar when this is even before hitting that city, or tell me that, like, tell me your story of like actually connecting with country and going, yeah, we're gonna do some stuff.
Well, I when I got to Guatemala, I was, processing a bunch of trauma that had just happened in the 2 months. I was like real root chakra fucked upness. And I remember even there was a long drive from the airport, probably about a 3-hour drive from the airport to Lake Atitlan. And the guy was like, so why are you here? What are you doing? And I was just like, no, it's crazy. And as the windows are down, I'm feeling the trauma leaving my body, and I'm feeling the land kind of like rising up, like, you're okay, like you can't hear, that what you experience isn't going to happen. And I did have a few dreams while I was by Lake Atitlan, where I was actually dreaming about traumas I had experienced just over those couple of months in the United States. So at that point, I was not yet sure where I just needed, my body needed to be safe. I needed to feel safe in a very root chakra way. It was probably about 4 weeks into my living at a very cute hostel in Quetzaltenango, that where my, the trauma had disappeared. I was making really cool connections with people around the world who were staying at the hostel. I was dating a guy, and he was able to bring me to a couple of cool bars, help me to meet some people. And I started to feel my roots go more into the ground here. And I was looking at, what the American dollar looks like in my environment. And it was like, this is great. And it was around then, it was probably around 5 or 6 weeks into my being in Guatemala overall, that I was like, this is a good place to be. There's a lot of artistic culture in Quetzaltenango, not just traditional culture, but, youth, artistic, activisty, punky direction, all of that exists there. And I just began to, so much so that I began to fall so in love with the city, so much so that before I boarded my flight to Brazil for what I thought was going to be just a 3-week trip, I remember sitting like in the square, looking around and crying, and just being like, wow, you really have become home to me, this little enclave. And if the world, goes to shit, which I had no idea what was ahead. I had no idea that COVID would be in a month or two. I had no idea what would be ahead, but it was just thinking like, if the world goes to shit, this is a great outlier place. This is a great place to put my feet. It's not a place that I would have thought I would have wanted to live, because for years I imagined myself extra cosmopolitan. I need a city. I need London. I need LA. I need New York. And it was humbling to realize I don't need that. I don't need that at all. I'd like to visit sometimes, but I don't need to live in the center of insanity.
Yeah. I'm in this photo and I don't like it, right? Like I didn't expect.
Yes.
I didn't expect to live at literally the edge of the world.
Yeah, and like it. Oh,
I love it. But the bit that I struggled with is I came to the same accord because I love cities and I love city spirits. I don't want to be in them. And I think that part of the stuff that powers cities at the moment is toxifying as this archon gets closer to the surface. So I don't think they're going to be, universally, I don't think they're going to be pleasant places for a little while. But I was not informed that, as I kind of knew the when of this apocalypse, but not the what. And I was not informed that I would not be allowed to go to cities.
That really has sucked.
Deal, right? It's like, yes, I'll live on a fucking farm. And I love it. I love it down here. I've never, just talking about connected to country and the rest of it. There's a Maori word. It's actually the place where we stand tall, Turanga Waiwai, which is the name of the it also means footstool, but it's the name of the sort of royal enclosure for Maori royalty at the moment. But I feel that place where we stand tallness here. But by the same token, I would like a nice coffee every once in a while.
Even my love of iced coffee, like Guatemala, Brazil has its own coffee culture. So I'll be in a really nice restaurant and I'll be like, cafe gelato, and they'll be like, absolutely not. I'm like, how do you have this rare mushroom on this rare lettuce? How can you give me everything and not a fucking iced coffee? So there are things that I hear you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's funny, just going back to what you were saying about sitting in that square and the sense of, in retrospect, an overly emotional response, right? Because when the global lockdown stuff started happening, I was in fact in London. And so I sort of, in the last helicopter out of Saigon sense, had my mother and James like on the phone to Qantas overnight. Well, my overnight when I was there sleeping to get me on basically the last plane in before they start closing borders and so on, right? So, but I remember leaving Tasmania and having a peculiar, like, overly emotional response that sounds strangely in resonance to what you were talking about with the square. So, and yeah, I mean, how is Brazil? I mean, let's go with glass half full. If you're stuck there, it's not like it has its own charms, that's for sure.
It has its own charms. It has, and it's been a little rough because I'm, I guess, a more other parts of Latin America oriented person, and Brazil has a really weird standing. Probably some shit went down between Spain and Portugal that I'm not yet aware of, but it's evident in the fact that Brazil shares a continent with all of these Spanish-speaking countries, and it is not required to learn Spanish. You are learning you're learning Brazilian Portuguese, or you're learning English. And the ATMs, if you go to the ATMs say Portuguese, English. And I'm like, but you're sharing this continent with all of these other countries. And so Brazil is, it's Latino, but it's a little bit of a funhouse mirror energy of Latino. Portuguese is, I can get along. I've learned enough Portuguese and I know enough Spanish to get along here, but Portuguese is not close enough yet to Spanish. It's been a bit strange. It's not. I did not know I was going to come here and live here for a year. I didn't expect that at all. And my partner, when we met, then there was the month of me in the hospital in a Brazilian public hospital, and healthcare is free. That's amazing. That talk about glass half full. But after that, as we started our relationship, there were a lot of interesting things for us to both discover spiritually and magically. As these things go, you're going to form a deep bond with someone and be the kind of person that I am or you are. There's going to be really interesting things that come up. Nothing is coincidence. There's going to be a lot of, stuff to explore together that you would not have explored if you were just, operating of your own will, single, walking down the street. So there's been ways in which I've been sort of mired energetically in what has come up for us and working those things out. COVID has in some ways been supportive of that because there's not much leaving the house, but when we, do leave the house, there's the street, there's La Rua, there's a Rua, there's not, we're waiting, we're waiting excitedly for the movie theater to reopen. There's no clubs open, there's no bars open. There's this house and there's food. We are planning to make it to the ocean, hopefully within the next few weeks. Brazilian soap operas are really dramatic and have a theme song that reminds me way too much of The Sims for me even to try to take things seriously. I'm like, every time it plays, I'm like, why is this music from The Sims, the computer game? It's literally The Sims. So yeah, there hasn't been much cultural adventure. There's been a lot of spiritual adventure in the house, in our consciousness and unconsciousness. In my experience of foods, rabanada, which is this kind of like Brazilian French toast, fucking delicious, blows French toast out of the water. That's an adventure in and of itself.
Nice. So that was interesting to me because, so would you say, because one of my other questions was like, what's been the most interesting or surprising new, I guess, endemic ally that you found in Brazil? Because you do end up, when you're put somewhere that you aren't expecting to. It's a time to kind of open up and go, well, what is the meaning or the lesson in this? Like, why is this?
Yeah, you don't act prideful like the father in The Witch. You don't act prideful. You surrender.
Yeah. And it's interesting that it looks like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like that the meaning for you to be in this situation is to explore interpersonal and specifically like relationship, romantic entanglement stuff, not just with this person, with your partner, but also in like the broader sense of like, well, we're basically being put through therapy.
For sure.
So would you
Absolutely.
say is that where you locate the lesson for this? Or what has been some surprising like spirit or endemic plant allies or other things that you did not expect to be interacting with now that you're in your little Brazilian vacation?
The duende stuff has been mind-blowing. He has like a huge amount of, he's actually from a different part of Brazil. He's actually from Belém, which is North Coast Brazil. And New York, from my understanding, Belém is sort of a beach city. He actually took me to a Belém-themed restaurant a few weeks ago, and it was amazing watching him become this old, like, cha-cha-cha kind of man, like eating his traditional foods. Like, he just, like, parts of him just came alive, eating, like, these traditional, like, shrimp soups and stuff. And it was like watching this, and it was also weird because the music they were playing in the restaurant was like beach music that you would hear in the US, but in Portuguese. It's like no matter where you go in the world, beach vibe is the same. It was very strange. But Belém has a bunch of fae lore specific to this city. And he's like telling me, we've got this kind of fae that walks, this kind of duende that walks with its feet backwards, and this kind of duende, you catch it with this. And, it took me a couple of weeks as I was watching certain like habits and gestures and mannerisms of his, that I was like, you've got some stuff going on, dude. Like, I think that what you think is just like city lore is a little bit more perhaps personal and ancestral for you. And once that recognition like clicked into place, there was a bunch of stuff that showed up that we had to do in that direction, both for himself and for me. And it was just amazing to watch things shift and change, and things that had been a little bit more wily and uncontrollable and unconscious snapped in as more supportive energies. There were things that I would not, I'm in no way a Solomonic magician, but there were some things that showed up in our process that needed to be dealt with very specifically in a sort of shamanic, Solomonic grimoire perspective. And that was, interesting to me and very cool just to know that, I'm backed by spirits and energies that, they're not going to try and force their modalities. If they know that there's a way that, things can be handled, they will, gladly lead me to those persons who can support me in handling them in the most effective way. We've been living in an Airbnb in Sao Paulo that has 60 elephant statues. So that's obviously a thing. One or two of those statues is of Ganesh. And I think like the first week we moved in here, like one of the first Tuesdays, I sat down and we put on some, Om Gane Mani Patre Om, for him, and lit some incense. And we're like, obviously you are related to the spirit of this house, or the guy or at least the guy who's renting us this Airbnb. So here's some incense, and please keep our roads open and destroy any obstacles in our way. Yeah, and then there's the issues. There's the issues and Eshu and Pombagira. It's been interesting because the United States and New York in particular have a very interesting perspective on Kimbanda, and the Eshus and Pombagira is one that very much reflects American addiction to intensity and American pride issues and American issues with control. Being here and seeing a much more fluid Kimbanda, a much more far more of, sure, it's a hierarchical tradition as far as the spirits go, but a quimbanda that is absolutely far more, de la gente, of the people, far more in the people's hands, whereas I had been engaged in some circles of quimbanda where there were authoritarian things that were just in no way native to the tradition and were just absolutely reflections of some people's deeply unresolved ancestral colonial issues. Very liberating to more deeply connect with the tradition that's very close to my heart on its own ground, on its own land, and through a lens that is far closer to the way it's seen here. So those, I would say that these have been, some of the primary energetic encounters I've been having while I've been here.
It's interesting. I like that you sort of zeroed in on that liberating as a word, or liberation or liberatory, because it's almost like physical prison, non-physical liberation. It's one of the things, because I want to, towards the end of the show now, invite some suggestions as to how people can be with this moment, from a ritual and even just a thinking process. But one of them, because that's been one of the things for me with Tasmania's bizarre rules. If I leave the state, I'm not allowed to leave the farm for 2 weeks, and the police come by and my phone battery goes dead or 50% by like 9 a.m. So they're obviously literally, and I resent this frankly, using my own battery to power the surveillance to make sure I don't go anywhere. And so far I've spent a month under like literal house arrest, where it's like, you absolutely, not even to go to the shops can you leave. I mean, we're on 5 acres, so I can get outside. There are certainly people who have it worse at the moment, but I've had to sit with physical confinement, non-physical freedom, right? It's like, well, if I can't go anywhere, it's like, well, into the spirit room, time for some journeying.
For sure, exactly.
Don't go crazy. And I like that seems to have been, I absolutely agree, like being on country there's nothing else for it if you want to look a particular tradition in the eye, right? But it's funny that you can see in a state of imprisonment the control structure or imprisoning capacities this thing has had put on it once it left Brazil. So it's like an interesting inverse there, right? But yeah, so what do you think? What's the kind of stuff people can be doing with this moment? Just general advice, spirit advice, ritual suggestions, that kind of thing, for how people can like be present for it, I guess, and also get through it.
I think one of the first things that, I'm big on, like, is the perspective, or is the story I'm telling the best story? This is a story that serves me. And we tell ourselves so many stories, about ourselves, about the world, that might feel good, that might scratch an itch, that might, serve part of our ego. But is this the best story? Does this serve you the most? So one of the first stories I had to tell myself, about a few months in, was I was like, all right, Kai, you're telling yourself the story that this pandemic has totally ruined your life. You're telling yourself the story that this pandemic is totally standing in the way of your goals and your soul's purpose. What if you told yourself the story that this pandemic was absolutely necessary for this stepping into a more full expression of your soul's purpose? It's here. It's not going anywhere. The situation is what it is. What if, because you can't change the situation, you can't invent the cure today, and if someone does invent a cure, it won't be you. So what if you just told your story that this was necessary, and this is actually this pandemic was a vital piece of you stepping into the fullest expression of your soul's purpose? What if you tried that? And I think that's a good perspective to consider. What it takes the limits, and it takes these limits that have been put on us, and instead of seeing them as imprisoning, but it takes those limits and makes them appear as roads. I need this. I needed this amount of concentration. I needed this amount of social distancing. My soul's purpose needed to find ways to be expressed in more nuanced and more creative and more long-term thinking capacities than I would have been allowed had I been, given all of the distraction that the modern world had before this happened. My soul's purpose needed this. That's one perspective that might be helpful for some folks. Another thing that I think it serves people to be doing is, even though we are all, at least my favorite people are book obsessed, get out of your head and get into, the forest or the wild. It's not the club, it's not the bar, but it is, in that condensing of our lives, there are energies that perhaps are a little bit more able to speak with less noise in our cities and towns. Going out to the beach, the wilds, the forests, making those offerings, working with the local. Everything has turned more local. Get into it, man. It's the stuff. Get into the more local. I try to get over to Ibirapuera Park at least once a week and make offerings and sing by the lake. And I feel the energies show up and support the work that I'm doing back here at my house about a kilometer away, because now I have to think in kilometers. It's so weird. I'm just like, it's so weird. Making those offerings to spirits of the local. I'm an international vagabond. I've got big plans. I want to do the weird shit. I want to, heal the European atrocities, but I'm not in Europe right now. I'm here in Brazil with, documentaries about American racism on the television in Portuguese, before I go over to Ibirapuera with some, habanada or brigadeiros there's a lot of local happening for me in a new context, but it's local nonetheless. And I have to accept the invitation to be local, choosing that local. And, especially as we're moving into, Halloweeny Samhain time, it's a great time to deepen one's trance work. Journeying, asking specifically for ancestral helping spirits that can aid you at this time. There are ancestral spirits of yours that are far more connected and more easily able to operate in the local. Asking those ancestral helping spirits, local, for help with stuff that is about you, stuff that is about your family, stuff that is about your surroundings. How do you partake in this local conversation on all levels? There's tons of stuff to do if you think locally. Think globally, act locally. Think on that ends. Again, it's wiser to change oneself than trying to change the world. You don't even have access to the world right now, but you've got more than enough for what you need to do right now. And when we all come out on the other side of this, we will be the better for having acted as locally as possible.
Really good stuff. It took me a while. There was a grief period, and then I had to do a story switch up at the beginning myself.
Right?
I had to grieve the same kind of like globe-trotting wizard life that I had, like, not just planned but paid for in 2020. It took a long time to get my flights refunded.
I can only imagine, for sure.
But I think that's really good, and I really like the if you are local, prioritize it and the ancestral helping spirit thing. Have you noticed anything unusual, I guess, in aggregate in your practice? Like, are there things that is there something there that we could turn into some ritual suggestions for people? Like, are there particular entities that people are encountering, or kind of like narrative fragments that keep coming up at the moment? Is there anything in that direction? Or otherwise, like, a general either energetic or even cleansing or something, or heart practice, I think is quite good at the moment. Breath and heart in 2020, all things considered, have been quite good. But anything in that world you want to add?
Sure, there's been a lot of Fae stuff. There's been a lot of Fae/Duende stuff showing up in my practice, either personally or ancestrally, even ancestral lines that have gotten a little wonky because someone who was supposed to be a supportive medicine person and, so they're taking up a lot of energetic space in the line, ended up being abducted and returned in a kind of loopy way. That's been a theme. So resolving abducted ancestors, helping people who themselves have been abducted, either by whether you want to take a more cosmic lens on that or you want to take a more Fae/Duende lens on that. Both of these things are applicable. A lot of these things have been related to people feeling safe on the earth, feeling fully embodied and empowered. These have been things since I've brought contracts and vows more heavily into my practice, to the extent that I will literally encourage people to let's make some vow clearing statements or contract clearing statements. Can I make those right now? Just some basic grenade throwing contract clearing statements. Can I share those?
Go for it.
All right, let's do it. So one thing I sometimes encourage, clients to do based on divination, sometimes you got to go seeking through the rubble for more specifics, but a good, grenade throwing, contract clearing statement would be something like any and all contracts, oaths, vows, agreements, covenants, bonds, pacts, personal, ancestral, or lineage that no longer serve me are cleared, canceled, and nullified in this and all other dimensions. And you can take it another way. Any and all contracts, oaths, vows, agreements, covenants, bonds, pacts, personal, ancestral, or lineage with any entities that no longer serve me are cleared, canceled, and nullified in this and all other dimensions. Any and all spiritual vows, personal, ancestral, or lineage that no longer serve me are released in this and all other dimensions. Any and all spiritual vows, personal, ancestral, or lineage with any entities that no longer serve me are released in this and all other dimensions. And these are actually just template. These are if you just make these four statements, it's like you're throwing huge grenades at structures of contracts and vows, and the universe / helping spirits, whatever you want to call it, definitely immediately operate and shit shifts. But these are also templates to get a little bit more creative with. You can use these, and if you're like, damn, I've always had some problems with creativity, I've always had some problems with writing, you can tweak these. You can start thinking about anything that's standing in the way of my will, anything that's standing in the way of my creativity that no longer serves me, or just working from whatever angle, opening yourself intuitively to the possibility that you've got some things, some contracts happening personally, ancestrally, or lineage-wise. What I mean by lineage is, we belong to spiritual lineages, cosmic lineages connected to tribal energies, connected to gender and queerness. These are the universe totally recognizes us as parts of things that have continued lines, lineages, and some of these lineages do have energetic contracts. Some of them serve you and uphold you, some of them don't. So these are some things that I would suggest. Another ritual that I often encourage clients to do is an unbinding ritual. You can take a string and wrap it around your abdomen. I would wrap it around your abdomen in such a way that the string crosses with your navel. And I want you to tie it tight around your abdomen so you really feel it. And in the sort of hoodoo folk magic understanding of consecration, you might dip your right thumb in a bit of whiskey or rum and make the sign of the cross over the string 3 times and say something like, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Or if you have a different cosmological idea of the sacred, that's fine too. But you're pretty much consecrating this string as the bindings on your life, as the limits, the limitations, past, present, parallel, other, lifetime, from wherever these bindings are from. You have now consecrated this string to be those bindings. And then you might take a few deep breaths and just really just bring yourself into that magical mindset that this string is those it's been this string all along. It's been this string the whole fucking damn time. Just really feeling that limit around your abdomen. You might take some scissors, or if you've got a sacred knife or athame, that's fine too. And you might cut that string and immediately begin breathing into that area of your body, feeling the freedom that you have based on intuition or divination. You might then burn the string and bury the ashes off property, or you might just bury the string off property. But I always suggest that people then put on their favorite song, that song when it comes on in the club and you're 3 shots in and you need to get up, you need to get on the floor, you put that song on and you dance this freedom that you now have, feel breathing deeply into this part of your body, because just like these grenade throwing contract and vow clearing statements that you just made, this is another, a bunch of shit that was on you, a bunch of shit that was holding you tight is not there anymore. And it's okay that you might not know all of it, but you've got a lot more access to your will now, and a lot more access to that will. And perhaps you'll be able to deal with the local a little bit better too, and not be reaching outside of yourself for those distractions that capitalism loves for you to be involved in, but that you absolutely don't need. You've got more of your local to work with.
Well, I think that's some splendid stuff for people to sit with and so on. And I have it's been too long, so I kept you too long, sir. Thank you, Dr. Spaceman.
Thank you so much for having me, man.
For people who want to know more, like what do you got going on? Where can they find you? Where can they reach you? That sort of stuff. Lay it on us.
Sure. You can find me at my website is impactshamanism.com. You can also find me being silly and gay on Twitter, and posting ever increasingly thirst trap shots on Instagram. I'm around,
Nice one. All right. Well, once again, sir, good. Thanks. Excellent chat, and good luck getting home.
Thank you so much, man. Be well. Thank you so much for this awesome chat.
Always a good chat catching up with Kai. And I guess, to be honest, I don't really have any more to add here in the outro beyond the suggestion not to sleep on that idea of telling a different story. It's very Charles Eisensteinian in a lot of ways. So, how to tell stories that transmute despair and also transmute solutionism. And I think Kai's description of uncovering that process is really actionable. It's also, for you guys, a journeying opportunity, or even an opportunity to simply throw some cards on which part of your new story you may have yet to notice. This will be one long apocalypse, and you will not make it through running on whatever reserves were in the tank when it began. So switching up the story, telling a new story, can be considered, to carry on with that metaphor, a free energy device, if you will. So get it right. Allow the right story to find and envelop you. And you can keep going as long as we need to. And hopefully in a mode that is largely free from exhaustion. So yes, that's this week's show. We are also officially in October, so naturally there will be at least one seasonally themed episode coming up. And after all that talk of travel, actually, there will be some family-related adventuring this month, which will in fact be the first time I have seen them in a year, or this year. But anyway, that's all to say that we have some really cool shows coming up, but their release dates may be something of a surprise. I don't know, call it trick or treat. Until next time.